For centuries, Palestine was a land of olive groves, bustling markets, and ancient cities. Jerusalem, Hebron, and Gaza stood as living testaments to civilizations that had risen and fallen, leaving behind stories etched in stone and sand. Families lived in tight-knit communities, passing down traditions through generations, creating a culture deeply tied to the land. Life here was simple yet dignified, rooted in both faith and heritage. Palestine's identity was shaped by centuries of diversity, where Muslims, Christians, and Jews lived side by side, sharing the same streets, water wells, and schools. Despite differences, they were bound by a common homeland. The rhythm of life was marked by harvest seasons, religious festivals, and trade caravans that passed through the crossroads of empires. The land was not merely soil, it was memory, faith, and belonging. However, whispers of change echoed across Europe in the late 19th century. Colonial ambitions and nationalist movements began shaping destinies far from Palestine's borders. The rise of the Zionist movement, fueled by centuries of persecution in Europe, envisioned a homeland in Palestine. For Palestinians, the thought of mass migration seemed distant, almost impossible, for their land was already alive with people and history. But as the Ottoman Empire weakened and the shadow of World War I loomed, Palestine stood at the edge of transformation. Its quiet hills and sacred cities were about to be thrust onto the stage of global politics, where promises, betrayals, and wars would reshape its destiny forever. The fall of the Ottoman Empire after World War I opened the gates for European powers to divide the Middle East. Under the British Mandate, Palestine became a land caught between imperial interests and rising tensions. Britain had promised the Arabs independence for their support during the war, but in secret, it also pledged support to the Zionist cause through the Balfour Declaration. The betrayal sowed seeds of mistrust. Jewish migration increased, with ships arriving at Mediterranean ports, carrying families seeking refuge from persecution in Europe. To Palestinians, these arrivals soon felt overwhelming. Land purchases expanded, farms were taken over, and villages faced displacement. What was once a trickle became a tide, altering the demographic balance. Palestinians began to resist not only the British authorities, but also the growing Zionist presence. Riots, protests, and strikes erupted, demanding independence and justice. The British, however, often sided with Zionist militias, deepening Palestinian resentment. The land that had once seen coexistence was now turning into contested ground. By the 1930s, violence escalated into open rebellion. The Arab Revolt of 1936 to 1939 was brutally crushed by the British with the help of Zionist paramilitary groups. Thousands of Palestinians were killed or imprisoned, while their leaders were exiled. The resistance was strong, but the imbalance of power was overwhelming. When World War II broke out, the Jewish people faced horrors in Europe that shook humanity. The Holocaust left millions dead, and survivors desperate for safety. The global conscience shifted, and support for a Jewish homeland grew stronger. Palestine, already strained, became the focus of international pressure. At first, Palestinians showed sympathy. Communities offered help, food, and shelter to Holocaust survivors arriving on their land. But as migration grew unchecked and militias like the Haganah, Irgun, and Lehi gained strength, Palestinians realized their compassion was being overshadowed by a systematic push for dominance. In 1947, the United Nations proposed partitioning Palestine into two states. One for Jews, one for Arabs. For Palestinians, it was an outrage. How could outsiders divide their homeland without their consent? Yet, global powers endorsed the plan, seeing it as a solution to the Jewish plight. Palestinians felt betrayed once again. The following year, 1948, marked the catastrophe, al-Nakba. As Israel declared independence, Palestinian towns were destroyed, over 700,000 people were expelled, and entire villages vanished. The resistance had begun, but the scars of displacement would last for generations. The newly born state of Israel was immediately recognized by major powers, while Palestinians were left stateless, scattered in refugee camps across neighboring Arab countries. The surrounding Arab nations launched wars in 1948 and later in 1967, but despite their efforts, Israel expanded its territory further, occupying the West Bank, Gaza, East Jerusalem, and the Golan Heights. For Palestinians, every war meant more loss of land, homes, and dignity. Families lived in makeshift tents, waiting for a return that never came. The resistance now took shape through both armed struggle and political voices, determined to reclaim their homeland. Yet the resilience of Palestinians never wavered. Secret schools were built in camps, songs of return were sung at weddings, and underground movements formed. Even in despair, hope remained a weapon. Resistance was no longer just physical. It became cultural, spiritual, and unyielding. But with every uprising came heavy retaliation. Israeli airstrikes, military raids, and mass arrests intensified. The cycle of violence deepened, and international powers often turned a blind eye, leaving Palestinians to face the struggle largely alone. In 1987, frustration boiled over into the First Intifada. Palestinians armed with stones and slings faced Israeli tanks. It was a powerful symbol, the powerless rising against the powerful. The images shocked the world, forcing international media to confront the reality of occupation. The uprising was not only about weapons, it was about reclaiming dignity. Women led protests, children became symbols of courage, and communities organized strikes and boycotts. The world began to see Palestinians not as silent victims, but as a people demanding their right to exist. In 2000, the Second Intifada erupted, this time deadlier and more militarized. Suicide bombings, assassinations, and brutal crackdowns marked the era. Cities turned into battlegrounds, and once again, international diplomacy failed to deliver peace. Yet even through bloodshed, resistance lived on. Poetry, art, and music became tools of survival. Mahmoud Darwish's verses echoed through generations, reminding Palestinians that as long as they remembered their land, it could never truly be lost. The 21st century brought new challenges. Gaza, blockaded and besieged, became a symbol of suffering and defiance. With every bombardment, its people rebuilt their homes, schools, and hospitals, even when destruction seemed endless. To live in Gaza became an act of resistance itself. In the West Bank, settlements expanded, cutting villages apart and dividing communities with walls and checkpoints. Palestinians waited for hours to cross barriers. Mothers gave birth at checkpoints, and farmers were cut off from their own fields. Yet, the struggle for life continued each day. Still, resistance was not just about fighting. It was about survival. Every wedding held, every harvest gathered, and every classroom opened in defiance of oppression became part of the Palestinian struggle. And though decades had passed since al-Nakba, the dream of return never died. Keys to lost homes remained hanging in every Palestinian household, symbols of hope passed from grandparents to grandchildren. Today, Palestine stands at a crossroads between despair and resilience. Generations have grown up knowing nothing but occupation, yet their spirit remains unbroken. From Gaza to the West Bank, the struggle continues. On the streets, in universities, in art, and in diplomacy. The world watches, often divided, sometimes silent. But for Palestinians, silence is not an option. Their existence itself is resistance, their survival a testament to unyielding courage. Every chapter of Palestinian history is written with sacrifice and blood, but also with hope and dignity. The people of Palestine have shown that no amount of occupation or oppression can erase their identity. And so the story continues, not only as a tale of tragedy, but as a story of resistance, survival, and an unshakable belief in the right to live free on their own land.